Continuing on in the investigation into the Delta CRJ900 plane crash in Toronto, Canada on February 17th, 2025, the Transportation and Safety Board has released some new video, and they've also released some new photos and a preliminary report that's going to shed a lot of very important light on here for us and brings to light a lot more details that we didn't know before. And they seem to be sort of pointing the root cause in a certain direction here, indirectly. So today we're going to look at all of these new videos and these new photographs. We're going to walk through the preliminary report and perform our analysis on it. Here's some of the new video they showed us. The wing on the runway there where the plane had crashed. There's some of the scratch marks on the runway. And here's the plane still upside down inside the hangar in the same position where they found it. There's the escape hatch that the pilots used. You can see the scuff marks all over the body of the plane. Here's a close-up shot of wing. You can see how scorched it got. So now that they have the plane sitting up there on stands, they can examine it any way they want and perform all of their analysis. There's the black box, and there they are pulling the guts of it out there. So pretty much everything that they need is right there in the hangar. They have all of the parts situated just how they want them. The engines are there and everything else too. If you came here looking for one of those little short videos, like a 2-minute thing or summary, you're not going to get that here. You should go over to CNN or something, one of the other mainstream news media. They just summarize. Because here on this channel, we go through videos, we go through photographs, and we go through deep dives and we look at the numbers and the analysis and everything to really come to terms with what we're faced with. Okay, so here's what the TSB put into the preliminary report. So just a brief summary. On 17th of February 2025, this CRJ900 was operating as Endeavor Air Flight EDV 4819 from Minneapolis-Saint Paul, and it was flying to Toronto. And during the landing on runway 23, the aircraft impacted the runway. The right wing detached and fire ensued. The aircraft overturned and slid down the runway inverted, coming to rest near the intersection of runway 23 and runway 15L. Aircraft rescue and firefighting responded, and all the passengers and crew evacuated. Okay, so now we're getting into the meat of the preliminary report. And what it's telling us right here, and this is the important information to know right here, is the landing reference speed, Vref, for the approach is 139 knots. Now, when you look into the manual, the flight manual for Endeavor Air's CRJ700/900 series, the flight manual says that the final approach is flown at Vref plus 5 knots, which means that the plane should have been flying then at around 144 knots because you add 5 onto the 139 right there. So, but it says here, when operating in gusty wind conditions, you have to increase that Vref by 1/2 of the gust factor, not to exceed 10. And so the maximum we can add to that is 10. Okay, so it says here on the occurrence flight, the flight crew set the speed bug to be Vref plus 5 knots or 144 knots. So given the reported wind gusts, the approach was flown at 149 knots. So as we look at this, I'm thinking, should they have added 10 or should they have added 5 to the equation? And would that have mattered any? See, because when we look at the weather at the time, you can see right here, winds from 270 degrees true at 28 knots, but it was gusting up to 35 knots. So you got about a 7-knot gust. And if you take half of that, it would be 3.5. You would have 3.5 knots, and then you would adjust it upward if you wanted to round it up to 5. So that's why they used Vref plus 5 knots. Okay, so it came out to 144 knots or so. But it says, given the reported wind gust, the approach was flown at 149. So it does look like they did indeed add 10 to it. So the report goes on to show us a few different timestamps, and I want to go through some of these real quick to show us the importance of what was happening and how the descent rate was going to affect what was going to happen when the plane landed. So right here, so this is about 36 seconds or so before landing, the aircraft descended through 500 feet above the ground level. The indicated airspeed was 150 and the ground speed was 121. So it was right on track there at this point in time. And it says here the engine thrust was 64% and the rate of descent was 720 feet per minute. And the localizer glide slope were centered. 5 seconds later, the pilot flying disconnected the autopilot. The only thing I see wrong here is this 720 feet per minute, I think, is too fast for this plane. And you're not going to have a good landing here. And I think this is beyond the parameters of a safe landing, actually. Okay, so let's look at the next timestamp here. This is about 5 seconds later. When they got through 175 feet, the airspeed is still looking okay, 144 knots, with a ground speed of 121 knots, and the descent rate is 672 feet per minute. Okay, so it looks like the descent rate is dropping a little bit, but it's still, in my opinion, too high. Now, I've seen different reports. Some say that 600 feet per minute is allowed, and others say a different thing. So I decided to check with ChatGPT on this one, who is usually very accurate on just about everything I've ever checked on it with. And it says the descent rate at the moment of landing of touchdown for a CRJ900 should ideally be 100 to 300 feet per minute. So here's the table it gives you here. Look at this. 100 to 200 feet per minute gives a smooth, controlled landing. 200 to 300 gives you an acceptable, sometimes necessary in bad weather, right? Gives you a firm landing. And a hard landing, which I've only experienced once in my life on a flight, it says may require inspection for structural stress. And so, of course, it definitely appears that they were well over this level right here. So my question is, for many of you expert pilots out there, who is right here? Is ChatGPT correct on this? Now coming back to the timestamps, and I'll make a spreadsheet to show you all of this so you can see exactly what's happening. It's, looking through all of these numbers gets blinding after a little bit looking through these paragraphs. But here you are approximately 13 seconds or so before the crash. The aircraft was descending through 153 feet, and its airspeed had increased to 154 knots, so that's a little bit high. They typically want it to be probably from 144 to 150, and the ground speed did not change appreciably, and the pilot flying pulled back the thrust levers as a result over the following 5 seconds to decrease the thrust. Okay, from 64% down to 43% will remain until touchdown. And then the airspeed began to decrease. So right here, they're taking corrective action, and it seems to be somewhat working. So here we are now 3.6 seconds before the touchdown. They're 50 feet off the ground, and the indicated speed was 145 knots, so that looks good. And the ground speed was 112 knots. The rate of descent, though, look at this. In just a few seconds, it had almost doubled. So it is now up to 1,114 feet per minute. So the enhanced ground proximity warning system gave the oral alert 50, which you normally get when you're coming in for a landing. It'll tell you 50, 40, 30. And so that sounded to indicate that the aircraft was at 50 feet, which is a standard call out. And then 1 second later, and this is 2.6 seconds before touchdown, now you get the alert that says sink rate, sink rate. And here's what it sounds like.
Sink rate. Sink rate.
Okay, so this alert was sounding and indicating a high rate of descent. See, now the problem here is, what do? You got about 2.5 seconds left, and you got to do something to try to slow down that descent. And it may be too late. That might not be enough time to react. You could just try to thrust that engine a little more, or maybe do a toga. And certainly, I know a lot of people are going to be blaming the female co-pilot, and we've seen a lot of comments about DEI and all of that stuff. But really, folks, even though she was the one flying the plane, the ultimate responsibility here lies with the captain. The problem you have here is that this captain is normally a flight instructor and was just sent out here to the field because you have to go out every so often, right, to keep your certification going. They want you out on the field actually flying. So somewhere between the two of them, maybe he should have wrestled the controls. Is 2 seconds enough time to wrestle the controls and make the appropriate changes? I don't know. Maybe somewhere along the line between the two of them, they should have seen that the descent rate was too fast. Okay, and now coming back to the timeline here, with 1.6 seconds to go before touchdown, the indicated airspeed was 136 knots, which seems a little low to me. I think that should have been in the high 140s, and the ground speed was 111 knots. The aircraft was slightly below the glide slope, but on the visual segment of the approach in tracking the runway center line. Now look at this. Again, the rate of descent had increased to 1072, and now you have a bank angle of 5.9. And also, you know, when we look back on the timeline here, going back to this 2.6 seconds before touchdown, notice here that the bank angle had increased to a 4.7 degree right bank. Now, that's sort of okay. 5 degrees is about probably the most you ever want to get. So you don't want to increase beyond that. So then coming up here to the next, you have 1.6 seconds before touchdown. The airspeed was 136 knots, which I think that's a little bit slow. It should have still been in the high 140s. And the aircraft was slightly below the glide slope, but on the visual segment to the approach and tracking the runway center line. Another one right here, a couple of bad things going on right here. The rate of descent had increased to 1072 feet per minute, and the bank angle was now 5.9 degrees to the right. So essentially 6 degrees. You're now beyond the safe bank angle, in my opinion. Okay, so now less than 1 second before touchdown, the aircraft indicated airspeed was 134 knots. And now, look at this. The bank angle is 7.1 degrees to the right. I think that is just now too far. Now you're in a high risk position. The pitch attitude here was only 1 degree nose up, and it probably should have been 3. And the rate of descent is now 1,110 feet per minute. See, because remember, you're normally expecting 2.5 to 3.5 degrees of a pitch up. But remember, when you do that flare at the last few seconds, you should be maybe, 5 to 7 degrees up. So clearly, this wasn't up enough. So what does this mean for them? As we've shown on the previous video here on this Delta plane crash in Toronto, the plane should be pitched up like this as a flare at that last couple of seconds. And that adds just enough resistance and friction. And, you know, just think of it. A plane flying like this is very smooth. But as you go like this, you're going to add resistance and slow down that rate of descent. And this was not done here. So here we are at the point of impact time, and the right main landing gear contacted the runway. The aircraft was in a 7.5 degree bank to the right with a 1 degree up of nose pitch and 3 G's of vertical acceleration at a rate of descent of approximately 1,098. Okay, so I just wanted to check the math on that G's to make sure that was right. So we have the formula here for G-force on landing impact. So it's G equals 1 plus the vertical speed over the gravitational acceleration times, of course, the time that it takes to decelerate to 0. So we have to make an assumption here. So what we have here is the assumptions that are going to be between, 0.2 or 0.5 seconds. So we'll put it at like 0.3. So anyway, yeah, we have to convert feet per minute to feet per second. So we take the 1098 feet per minute divided by 60, and you get 18.3 feet per second. And you enter all of this into our formula here. And remember, 32.2 is the gravitational acceleration. And then the 0.3 is what I put in there at the denominator to be our time to decelerate to 0. And so when you add it all up together, you come up to 2.89 Gs, which is about 3 Gs or so. So, and this is considered a hard landing. Now, if all of that seemed confusing to you, I took all of these numbers and everything that they gave us, and I made this spreadsheet here for you. So this will give us an at-a-glance view as to what was really going on here. So here you have the timestamps that they gave us in those paragraphs, and then I calculated here the seconds before the crash on them, and I gave the height wherever it was available. So you'll see NAs where there's nothing there, and then I did the posted speed that they gave us, and the ground speed, and the descent rate. And I put the items in red if I thought that they were out of bounds. So for example, the airspeed here was a little fast coming in there. And then here, as they throttled back, you can see how they reduced the airspeed, but then they got a higher rate of descent over here on the right. So this gives you a much better kind of at a glance as to what was going on. But you can see how when they popped out of 500 feet, they were right at the hairy edge of where you can be with acceptable descent rate. And it seemed like it was heading in the right direction. And then all of a sudden it just turned around and boom, they lost control of it, it looks like. So I know they're not going to come out and say pilot error, but I think we're going to see pilot error in this. Now the question is this pilot error in conjunction with the landing gear feeling? Like maybe there was something wrong in that the landing gear stay there that they're going to find out later, oh, maybe it was bad metal or metal fatigue, or maybe there was a crack or something. It could be the combination of the two. And who knows, maybe it might have survived had it not been damaged, right? That type of scenario. Or maybe it's just strictly 100% pilot error. We don't know. So what do you think? Do you think this is all pilot error, or do you think it's a combination of things here? Do you think that maybe there was a wind gust more than what we saw there, or maybe a little wind shear or something that maybe forced the plane down, or did they just not flare up like they should have? What is your opinion on this? At touchdown, what they're saying happened here is the side stay that is attached to the right main landing gear had fractured, and I'll show you the pictures of that in a minute. And the landing gear then folded into the retracted position. The wing root fractured between the fuselage and the landing gear, and the wing detached from the fuselage, releasing a cloud of jet fuel which caught fire. The exact sequence of these events is still to be determined by further examination of the fractured surfaces. Now here is a video that the TSB gave us yesterday to show us what was going on here with this landing gear.
The side stay attached to the aircraft's right main landing gear fractured, the landing gear retracted, and the wing root fractured between the landing gear and the fuselage, which is the central body portion of the aircraft.
Okay, so then they say the aircraft slid along the runway. The fuselage slid down runway 23, rolling to the right until it became inverted. A large portion of the tail, including most of the vertical stabilizer and the entire horizontal stabilizer, became detached during the roll. Okay, the aircraft went off the right side of the runway, and I'm going to show you all of this on the chart that they provided here. And it went into a covered grass area, and this is probably what helped put the fire out because of the grass and the snow. And it landed on runway 15L near the intersection of runway 23, 75 feet beyond the right edge of runway 23. So let's go see where all of that happened. So this right here is what the plane looked like when it found its final resting place here. And this right here is the wing about a couple of 100 feet on runway 23. So right here where the plane is, it's on a runway 15L. Now here's a better satellite view here showing exactly what happened. So the CRJ came landing this way, and the drag marks are in the snow going off here, off to the right, and it inverted, and then it ended up right here on 15L, about 75 feet off the rightmost edge of runway 23, which is this right here. Now the tail came off right here a couple of 100 feet before the CRJ900's final resting position. The wing, the right wing, broke off and it kept sliding off. So remember, it landed probably somewhere back over here, and then the wing detached and the wing kept sliding right down the runway and came to a stop right here. So this gives us a better representation of really where all of the parts of the plane landed in relationship to each other. Okay, now here when they're talking about the captain, says he has an airline transport pilot certificate. He has 3,570 total hours of flying time, including 764 hours on this aircraft type. And in the previous 7 days, he had worked 3 days as an instructor. So it seems like this guy spends a lot of time as an instructor. And then the first officer says she holds an airline transport pilot certificate. At the time of the occurrence, she had accumulated 1,422 hours of total flight time, including 418 hours on this particular aircraft type. And she was on day 5 of a 5-day cycle. On the day of the occurrence, she began her day in Cleveland with a flight to KMSP at 8:19. And then when she arrived at KMSP, she had 1 hour and 48 minutes until her next flight. So over the previous 30 days, she had conducted 3 round-trip flights into and out of CYYZ. So she had flown 56 hours in the previous 30 days. So the flight attendant had, so one of the flight attendants had 3 years of experience, and the other flight attendant had 11 years of experience. Okay, so at the time of the occurrence, the plane had a landing weight of 73,000 pounds. So there was about 6,000 pounds of fuel remaining at the time of landing. And of course, here's the weather. We've shown this before. 28 knots, gusting to 35. Now, I know some people had speculated that the plane came landing too short, but I don't think that's the case. It says the initial impact point was 420 feet past the runway 23 threshold, where the right main landing gear struck the runway surface. The aircraft came to rest inverted on 15L, as we showed you before, 1,800 feet beyond the threshold. Okay, so it doesn't appear that it came in short. Okay, and so here's the exact numbers here on the right wing. The right wing was about 215 feet beyond the main wreckage. Now, interesting what they're talking about here with the landing gear and how it collapsed. So remember, the main landing gear has two main landing gear assemblies mounted on the underside of the wing that retract inward into the wheelbase, and that each landing gear incorporates a shock absorber and, of course, the twin wheels. I'm going to show you the image that they showed us here, but I want to show you what their official statement was on the landing gear. A folding stay is attached to the wing rear spar and to the shock strut, and it locks the main landing gear in the extended position. The uplock assembly located in the fuselage structure provides a mechanical means of locking it into the retracted position. The uplock assembly releases the main landing gear from the up and locked position through hydraulic pressure for normal extension. This is the entire landing gear assembly. And basically, in a nutshell, through all of that gobbledygook, what they're telling you is that the outboard stay side of it, which is right here, broke when it landed. So at this point in time, we don't know 100% sure whether that landing gear stay there, whether that kind of sheared just from metal fatigue, or if it happened from the harsh landing. Now, my gut feeling says, because look at that speed that they came in landing, that descent rate was 1,100 feet per minute. I'm willing to bet that's what broke it, because I think that's beyond the structural limits, the design limits here of this landing gear. Now, of course, they will have to send all of this off to the metallurgy experts just for confirmation to see, just look at the shearing damage, and I'll show you the pictures of it as well. The right main landing gear outboard side stay fractured at the connection to the landing gear strut. The landing gear then folded inward, and the side stay remained in the down and locked position. So let's go to figure 5 here that they gave us. This is an actual photograph of it. So here's your landing gear side stay, and then as you notice here, see how you have this loop right here, this eye? The other one is missing right here on this side of it, because remember, it goes around the landing gear. And here they came in and took a close-up shot, and this picture is pointing down here. It's angled this way. They came in at an orthogonal angle to the surface, looking at it head on, and so you can see how it just sheared right off there. Now, was this shearing from the force, the excessive force of the landing from the descent rate, or will the metallurgy experts come back and say, no, it was metal fatigue, or maybe there was already a crack there that this just exacerbated the problem? So they will determine that during the course of the report. Remember, this is just a preliminary report. All the preliminary reports give us is, here's the facts we've collected so far. Here's the photographs we've collected so far. They will have to do all sorts of testing and stuff later on. So, but it does say that the main landing gear struts on this aircraft are designed to absorb the energy of a 720 foot per minute descent velocity at the maximum landing weight. So they were pretty close to that maximum landing weight, and they were way beyond the 720 feet per minute descent rate. So here they took the main landing gear strut and the side stay, and they were shipped and quarantined at the landing gear manufacturer for further examination. And here's the thing here. They said that during the main landing gear strut removal, the installation pins were moving freely at the landing gear trunnion attachments. So if you come back up here and look here at the trunnion, so they said all of these pins, everything was moving pretty good here. So there wasn't anything that appeared to have been seized up or, rusted or any of that kind of stuff. It says here the flaps and slats were fully deployed at the time of the occurrence. The flap jack screw thread threads were measured to be 10 inches for both the left and the right inboard flap actuators. This, of course, corresponds to 45 degrees of flap. So the flaps were set, and based on the measurements taken from the left slat, the slats were in a 25-degree position. They said the flight control cables from the flight deck to the severed locations were examined and showed to be continuous. The rudder and the elevator and the aileron control was validated for fuselage portion. No faults were found. The flight control components in the vertical stabilizer section were severely damaged, and they think that that's because of the accident sequence, not because of any pre-existing damage. Then, of course, the aileron controls of the right wing were torn from the aircraft structure in the main landing gear bay where the right wing detached. The aileron control was validated to the centering mechanism located to the aft of the main landing gear bay wall. So far it seems like all of the ailerons, everything there was working. The elevator's power control units and the mechanism were verified. No faults were found there. The elevator autopilot servo was removed and sent to TSB engineering laboratory. No corrosion was found on the cables. However, the body and the cables were severed during the accident sequence. The flight data recorder did not contain any caution or warning messages pertaining to the flight controls. Now they're showing us information here on the wings, and it says the right wing separated from the fuselage and the left wing was severely damaged but remained attached to the fuselage. The right wing main spar fractured at the fastener location to the fuselage, and the main spar was also bent significantly downward from the accident. So you can see it right there. Oof, it's just bent. Here's where it sheared as a result. So when the right wing broke off, the fuel spilled out of the wing and it ignited. There was significant fire damage to the wing, as I showed you on that picture before, on the runway where it was sitting, and the right wing fuel balance pipe, which is located inside the right wing, had a damaged sidewall that was deformed outwards. So here's the wing, there's the pipe right there, and it's just totally burnt. Okay, and then they rescued engines number 1 and 2, and the low pressure turbines were found still and free to rotate. Okay, so they were spinning just fine. The left engine forward mount had fractured during the accident sequence, but no abnormalities were found with the engines. So this can't be blamed on high power or anything, or low power, or an engine failing or something. They're telling us that they were in full working condition. Before the occurrence, though, the right engine integrated driven generator had been disconnected, and a minimum equipment list deferral was in effect for the repair. So apparently there's an MEL, they call it a MEL, or a minimum equipment list for this plane. And on that list, this is one of these items that needs to be checked. It's a generator. But it was on deferral because it was going to be repaired. So the auxiliary power unit was running instead. And that's, I guess, acceptable according to them and per the minimum equipment list. So this was the only deferred item that was in the entire journey log. So here's all of the components that they were able to collect here and send to the TSB engineering laboratory for further analysis. So there's really nothing on the plane that's missing. They should be able to give us a root cause analysis probably in about a year or so after they've analyzed all of these items here. The TSB also provided us with this other picture here, and you can see that upside down how everything collapsed down just right to the top of the seats. It's amazing that nobody got killed. Everybody was apparently sitting right there and belted in, and you figure your head's going to be right here, but look how close it came to your head there. Oof. And you can see all of the damage there. Everything got crushed down. Here is some of the suitcases that were left behind that came out of the storage overhead. The report showed us that the pilots had to escape through this little escape hatch on top of the cockpit there. And so that's where they egressed, and they had to be helped by one of the passengers. And so they said the aircraft rescue arrived about 5 minutes after the incident. And here's a graphic they gave us to show us what happened here. So what happened was people were trying to get out through this exit door right here at row 12. And because of the fuel that was leaking everywhere around this area, they couldn't get out that door. They had to go out this door instead here on 13. And even then, some people still got covered with a little bit of fuel. And then some of the people who exited also got sprayed by the fire retardant. And then up at the front, there was another exit here where the flight attendant had opened up this door right here. And the bathroom door had come dislodged and was blocking the view down the aisle here. So one of the passengers had to help them get rid of that door before people could escape out through this exit right here, on all of these on the starboard side. So these are the areas that they have to focus on here. And of course, the metallurgical examination of the wing structure. They have to certify the landing gear, the evacuation process, the flight deck door structure and design, the landing techniques, hard landings and pilot training, cabin obstructions. They're going to look at flight deck secondary egress routes. They have to look at organizational and management factors, flight attendant training, coordination in emergencies, and of course the response afterwards. These are all of the different organizations who are going to be participating in the investigation. So yesterday, the chairman of the TSB produced this short video for us, and it has some additional new video that we haven't seen before. Plus, he gives a little bit of an explanation here, so check this out.
Today, we released our preliminary report into the February 17 occurrence, where a CRJ900 aircraft struck the runway while landing at Toronto Pearson Airport and came to rest upside down. The report provides a progress update and outlines the facts gathered so far, though this information is preliminary and may evolve as the investigation continues. Accidents and incidents rarely stem from a single cause. They're often the result of multiple, complex, interconnected factors, many extending beyond the aircraft and its operation to wider systemic issues. Our investigations include 3 phases. The first is the field phase, where we gather evidence, document the site and wreckage, recover aircraft components, interview witnesses, and review technical documentation. We've now entered the examination and analysis phase, during which our investigators undertake a detailed analysis of the collected data to understand what led to the accident and what are the underlying safety issues and risks. This phase includes piecing together the sequence of events using multiple data sources and detailed simulations, extensive testing of aircraft components and systems, assessing human factors such as fatigue, pilot decision-making and training, as well as look into the aircraft certification, operating procedures, and regulatory requirements and oversight. Last is the report, where the draft report undergoes a careful review by the board and designated reviewers before being finalized and released publicly.
Now, if you missed my other videos from the last week or so, here in the United States, the NTSB released a preliminary report on the Philadelphia MedJet plane crash. You can see that one here. And then also around the same time, they released a preliminary report on the DC plane crash between the American Airlines jet and the Black Hawk helicopter. You can see that one here. So thank you for joining us, and we'll see all of you on the next one.